Today's biggest external headline for Korea is a sudden U.S. tariff hike. U.S. President Donald Trump announced a move that raises tariffs on imports from South Korea to 25%, up from 15%, framing it as a reciprocal trade measure and linking it to unresolved trade friction and approval issues around a revised trade deal. The immediate economic impact depends on what product categories the higher rate applies to and how quickly companies can reroute supply chains. But the signal is unmistakable. Trade policy risk is back at the center of Korea's export outlook. For Korea, this matters because the country's economy is heavily export-driven, and uncertainty itself can be damaging. When tariff rules change suddenly, firms delay investment, shippers adjust schedules, and pricing decisions get harder, especially for industries where Korea is globally competitive, like autos, electronics, and advanced manufacturing. Korean officials and industry groups are expected to push for negotiations, carve-outs, or transitional arrangements, and domestic politics may heat up as parties argue over whether Korea should respond with concessions, retaliation, or diversification away from U.S. exposed supply chains. For foreigners living in Korea, the impact can be indirect but real. Trade shocks can ripple into the won exchange rate, consumer prices for imported goods, and business sentiment, especially in sectors tied to global demand. For travelers, it can show up in exchange rate volatility and airline or retail pricing shifts if currency moves persist. The key practical takeaway? Watch for follow-up announcements, tariff schedules, effective dates, exemptions, and negotiation timelines. Those details will determine whether this is a short political warning shot or a longer-lived cost increase embedded into U.S.-Korea trade. With tariff headlines dominating the day, Korea's currency is reacting fast. Reports from Seoul's FX market show the won opening around 14.50 per US dollar, rising sharply versus the previous close. Currency moves like this matter because they quickly filter into daily life. International remittances, overseas card spending, imported goods, and the perceived stability of the broader economy. For foreigners living in Korea, a weaker won can be a mixed bag. If you earn in KRW and send money abroad, your remittance buys fewer dollars, euros, or baht. If you're paid in foreign currency and spend in KRW, the same move can improve your spending power. Students and travelers often feel it immediately through flight prices, hotel bills, or online subscriptions billed in USD. Businesses feel it through import costs, energy, raw materials, and some food inputs, and that can eventually push consumer prices upward, even if slowly. What's important is context. Recent analysis pieces have argued that 1400-plus levels may become sticky in 2026 due to global dollar strength, risk sentiment, and structural factors like outward investment and lower FX conversion of export revenues. That does not mean the won will fall in a straight line. It means volatility can remain high. Korea's authorities also watch fast moves closely, and market participants often expect verbal warnings or stabilization actions when swings look disorderly. Practical tip: if you have predictable foreign currency expenses, tuition, rent abroad, business payments, consider planning transfers in tranches rather than one lump sum. For travelers, check whether your card issuer offers better FX spreads than cash exchange booths. And for everyone, watch the next 72 hours signals: U.S. policy details, Korea's response, and whether the move holds above the psychological 1450 level. South Korea is signaling a major long-term bet on nuclear energy again. Multiple Korean outlets report that the government has confirmed a plan to build 2 new large-scale nuclear power units, with target operation dates in the late 2030s. The justification is straightforward: stable baseload power, energy security, and the need to support electrification, especially as data centers and AI-driven electricity demand rise. This is not just an engineering story, it's a national policy story. Nuclear projects require decades of planning, public acceptance, and strict safety oversight. Site selection, regulatory approvals, financing, and grid integration will become recurring political issues. Supporters emphasize that nuclear can deliver large volumes of low-carbon electricity with high reliability. Critics point to safety concerns, cost overruns, waste management, and the risk that long lead times can lock in inflexible infrastructure if technology or demand patterns change. For foreigners living in Korea, the direct effects are not immediate, but the direction matters. Energy policy shapes long-run electricity prices, industrial competitiveness, and the reliability of the grid. Things that affect everything from household bills to the cost base of jobs in manufacturing and services. It can also influence Korea's climate trajectory and the politics of local communities where plants are located. For visitors, it's mostly a background issue, but it influences national infrastructure priorities and, over time, how Korea markets its clean energy strategy internationally. In the near term, expect debate to focus on governance, how the government communicates risk, whether safety standards and emergency planning keep pace, and how local consent is managed. The key headline today is that Korea is choosing a pathway where nuclear remains central, not only for climate targets, but for the next generation of power-hungry industries. Alongside the decision to add 2 large reactors, Korea's broader power planning is also leaning into next-generation nuclear technology, especially SMRs, small modular reactors. In Korean media coverage around the newly confirmed long-term electricity plan, SMRs appear as a bridge option, smaller capacity units that, in theory, can be deployed more flexibly than traditional gigawatt-scale plants, while still providing firm, low-carbon power. Why does this matter? Because SMRs are not only about domestic electricity, they are also about industrial strategy. Korea has a strong nuclear engineering ecosystem and wants to stay competitive in a global market where countries are looking for dispatchable clean power and considering nuclear as part of energy security. If Korea builds real operating experience with SMRs, licensing, construction, supply chains, safety procedures, it strengthens credibility for exports and partnership deals. That is the strategic logic behind including SMRs in the same national roadmap that expands large reactors. But SMRs are not a free win. Globally, many SMR projects are still in early stages, and key questions remain. Can costs come down with standardized mass production? Can regulators adapt without lowering safety standards? And can waste management and decommissioning be handled transparently? Korea's debate will likely mirror those questions, plus the domestic issue of local acceptance, because smaller does not automatically mean controversy-free. For foreigners in Korea, the near-term impact is again indirect, but the significance is big for the economy. SMR-related R&D and construction can influence jobs, regional development, and the country's technology branding. It also matters for climate policy credibility. How Korea balances nuclear, renewables, and grid upgrades will affect both emissions and reliability. Today's takeaway is simple. Korea is not just extending old nuclear capacity. It is trying to position itself for the next phase of nuclear tech, and the policy choices made now will set the rules for decades. One of the most practical safety headlines for residents in Korea today is the major crackdown tied to overseas scam compounds. Reports say 73 Korean suspects were repatriated from Cambodia in a high-profile operation, and courts have begun issuing detention warrants for many of them. In updates, a significant number were reportedly detained, while others were still awaiting warrant review hearings. The case is being described as one of the largest single repatriations tied to organized scam operations, involving a large victim count and massive alleged losses. Why this matters for foreigners in Korea is simple. Scam ecosystems don't care about nationality. The same groups that target Korean victims often use multilingual scripts and platform-based deception that can hit expats too. Romance scams, fake investment, advice rooms, fake delivery or customs fees, and impersonation of banks or police. When authorities dismantle a large network, it also reveals the tactics you should watch for. So, what should you do? First, treat any message that creates urgency. Pay now, verify now, your account is frozen, as a red flag. Second, Don't move money based on a link or a caller's instructions. Hang up and call the official number from a bank website or the back of your card. Third, be cautious with online relationships that pivot quickly to money, crypto, or investment mentors. And if you're traveling or sending money cross-border, remember that scammers often exploit confusion around foreign exchange, overseas shipping, or immigration paperwork. Today's enforcement story also signals that Korea's authorities are investing more in cross-border cooperation and repatriation. That is good news, but it also means the scam market will adapt, shifting platforms and narratives. The best defense remains personal. Slow down, verify independently, and assume that professional language or official-looking documents can be fabricated. Korea's domestic politics story today is about a proposed opposition party merger and the backlash it triggered. Reports say the Democratic Party, DP, has discussed moving quickly toward a merger with the Cho Kuk Innovation Party ahead of upcoming elections. But the debate immediately ran into a classic problem: who keeps the party name and identity, and whether the smaller party is being absorbed. In coverage, DP figures reportedly suggested that the DP's name would remain, describing the process as integrating the smaller party's DNA into a larger organization. The Cho Kuk Innovation Party publicly bristled at this framing, arguing that a merger cannot look like a takeover and insisting on preserving its independent identity. Meanwhile, some voices inside the DP were also reported to be uneasy, warning against a rushed approach or messaging that could alienate allies and voters. Why this matters for foreigners in Korea is not partisan, it's practical. When opposition blocs reorganize, it affects the pace and direction of legislation on issues that touch daily life: labor rules, housing policy, budgets, criminal justice reforms, and regulatory changes. Even if you don't vote, political turbulence can shape headlines, markets, and policy timing. For businesses, who controls the agenda can influence enforcement priorities and regulatory uncertainty. What to watch next? Whether talks move from public messaging to formal negotiation committees, whether a compromise emerges around naming and leadership roles, and whether the ruling party seeks to exploit the tension or avoid inflaming it. Korean politics often rewards speed, but it also punishes perceptions of arrogance. If the merger pitch is perceived as an absorption rather than a partnership, the process may stall or fracture into competing factions just as election season accelerates. Korea is also reacting today to the death of a major political figure. Reports say former Prime Minister Hae-chan died during a trip to Vietnam, and his remains arrived back in Korea today. Multiple outlets describe a 5-day funeral period beginning January 27th and running through January 31, with arrangements involving both official and civic components, and a memorial site set at a major Seoul hospital funeral hall. Lee's significance comes from his long footprint in Korean politics. He served as prime minister and held senior roles within progressive politics over many years. When figures like this pass away, the immediate story is ceremony and condolence, but the deeper story is political memory. Competing narratives tend to appear: what he represented, which reforms he pushed, and how his leadership style shaped today's party structures. In the short run, parties often pause aggressive messaging, but behind the scenes, succession dynamics and factional positioning can still shift, especially if elections are approaching. For foreigners living in Korea, this is not just politics for Koreans. High-profile deaths can affect the public atmosphere, official schedules, and traffic around memorial venues. If you live near major hospitals or central Seoul corridors, you may see increased security, media presence, and ceremonial movements. For travelers, it's usually minimal disruption, but it's worth checking local advisories if you have appointments near the venue. The broader takeaway: Korea's political era is changing. When senior figures exit the stage, younger leaders gain space, and that can subtly change party priorities on budgets, welfare, labor, or foreign policy tone. Today, the focus is on mourning and ceremony. But over the next few weeks, watch how parties reference Lee's legacy, because that will hint at what kind of political identity they want to claim going forward. Korea's winter weather remains a serious daily life issue today. Forecasts report morning lows down to around 13 mm in parts of the country, with continued cold wave conditions in inland regions and intermittent snow or flurries in parts of the west and the south, including areas south of Chungcheong and Jeju. The practical risk is not just temperature, it's the cascade: black ice on sidewalks, frozen pipes, delayed commutes, and a higher chance of small fires from overloaded heating devices. For foreigners living in Korea, winter risk often comes from unfamiliar routines. Korean sidewalks can be deceptively slippery after a daytime melt refreezes overnight. If you drive, assume bridges, shaded roads, and small side streets freeze first. If you walk, give yourself extra time and wear shoes with grip. Falls are one of the most common winter injuries. If you live in older buildings, check water pipes and keep indoor heat stable to prevent burst pipes. And if you use portable heaters, avoid multi-plug overload, keep distance from fabrics, and never leave them on while sleeping. Travelers should also watch local updates if moving between regions. Even light snow can reduce visibility and slow highway traffic. Jeju flights can be affected by wind and precipitation, and mountain areas can shift rapidly from dry roads to ice. Korea's weather reporting is frequent, but the best approach is to check updates twice: once the night before and once in the early morning, because alerts can change quickly. Today's takeaway is simple: treat the cold wave as a safety event, not just bad weather. Build buffers in your schedule, reduce speed, and assume surfaces may be slick even when roads look dry. In winter Korea, the most dangerous moment is often the quiet one: early morning, a thin, invisible layer of ice, and one step taken too fast. Even if it's not a breaking street-level story, Korea's AI policy is becoming a daily life issue, especially for startups, employers, and anyone using AI services at work. Korea's AI Basic Act is being framed as a landmark step in building national AI governance and safety rules. Government policy briefings and news coverage describe a strategy that tries to balance regulation with growth. Clearer governance, transparency and safety obligations for certain systems, and support mechanisms to help companies comply. A key detail for businesses is the grace period approach. Reports explain that penalties, on-site inspections, and some enforcement measures may be softened or delayed for at least a year, giving companies time to build internal compliance systems. Another key debate is definition: what qualifies as high-impact AI, and whether standards are clear enough to avoid confusing compliance burdens. Critics worry that vague categories can chill innovation. Supporters argue that basic safety and accountability rules are necessary as AI moves into hiring, finance, energy, and public services. For foreigners in Korea, why should you care? Because the rules can shape the AI products you use. Chatbots, recommendation systems, workplace tools, and how companies communicate "this is AI" to users. Over time, it can affect consumer transparency, dispute resolution when AI-driven decisions go wrong, and how Korea positions itself relative to the EU and other AI regulators. If you work in tech, education, finance, or HR, you may see new internal guidelines: watermarking or disclosure policies, record keeping, model risk assessments, or user notification requirements. Practical takeaway: watch for sector-specific guidance. The broad law matters, but the real impact comes from detailed standards, enforcement priorities, and what regulators treat as high impact. If you run a business, plan early. Document your AI use cases and data flows. If you're an employee, ask how your workplace AI tools handle privacy and accountability. Korea is trying to regulate AI without suffocating it, and the success of that balance will shape the country's tech ecosystem for years. In today's top entertainment headline, K-pop group NMIXX has reportedly entered the US Mediabase Top 40 radio chart, with their track Blue Valentine ranking number 38 for the chart week tracked in late January. Mediabase rankings are based on US mainstream radio airplay data, so the story is being framed as a measurable signal of broader exposure beyond streaming fandoms. Why does this matter inside Korea? Because K-pop success has become a national export narrative. Chart milestones can influence everything from advertising deals to international tour demand and media strategy. Airplay recognition in the US also functions as a different lane from pure streaming. It can indicate that a song is being picked up in formats that reach casual listeners, not just dedicated fans. For entertainment companies, this can strengthen negotiations with overseas partners and help justify investment in English language marketing, radio promotion, and global PR. For foreigners living in Korea, this is a culture bridge story. If you're new to K-pop, radio airplay is one of the simplest indicators that a group is crossing from niche fandom into mainstream awareness. It can also show up in your daily Seoul life in subtle ways. Pop-up events, brand collaborations, and public promotions that target international audiences. For travelers, it's a reminder that Korea's cultural industry is a visible part of the city experience. Music in shops, giant screens in shopping districts, and event-driven crowds around entertainment hubs. What to watch next? Whether the track climbs or holds in the chart week to week, and whether it triggers additional US-focused promotions, interviews, festival slots, or partnerships. K-pop isn't just about one chart position. It's about building repeatable pathways into global media systems. Today's entertainment takeaway is that NMIXX is testing one of the hardest gates in pop music, radio, and at least this week they got through.